we have the pleasure to actually invite two key people from Queensland and Victoria to share with us their plans on the state biosecurity agendas. So let me first welcome Malcolm Letts. I had the opportunity to actually go through a lot of what Malcolm has been doing over the past many decades. So I've actually, Malcolm, let me read out who you are, then I'll hand over to you to actually top it up. And from there, happy for you to continue with the presentation. So Malcolm is the Deputy Director General and Chief Biosecurity Officer at DAF, Queensland, Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, Queensland. As Queensland's Deputy Director General and Chief Biosecurity Officer, Malcolm leads the policy and operations of Biosecurity Queensland, which is responsible for the government's efforts in preventing, responding to, and recovering from biosecurity threats across the state. He is a member of the National Biosecurity Committee, as Kat alluded to before. He has a particular interest in the use of technology and social research to optimize the benefits of investment in biosecurity. Malcolm also has previously worked as the Deputy Director General, Agriculture, and has extensive experience in agriculture policy and industry development. As Executive Director of Regions and Industry Development for about 5 years, he is also responsible for the trade and investment area of food and agribusiness. Malcolm has worked with the Queensland government for over 30 years and with the last 20 years in the senior executive roles. Welcome, Malcolm.
Thanks, Ram. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Really appreciate it. And I'm really going to give you a bit of a feel for some case studies around traceability systems. So we know everyone's familiar with the National Livestock Identification System and how it operates. I'll speak a little bit about that in terms of sheep and goat EID, but also I want to give a couple of case studies about other things that are happening in the traceability space. Queensland has, unfortunately, the lion's share of national biosecurity responses, not the least of which is the National Fire Ant Biosecurity Response. That means that the size of the biosecurity effort in Queensland is quite significant. And as a result of that, we have some work around building some alternative systems and investigating some alternative approaches to traceability. Thanks. We have the National Biosecurity Entity Register, which is something that Queensland built itself. It remains the cornerstone of our livestock traceability system. We have a portal launched in 2019, so it's relatively new, and it allows people to register, renew and update their details, including their livestock number, type and location. So this is for all ruminants, for all camelids, for all horses, zebras, mules, as well as for anyone who's got more than 100 birds that they keep for commercial purposes. So this is a much broader system than the NLIS, obviously, and it's in place to enable us to reach out and contact people. It does have the property identification code linked to it, and it talks to the National Livestock Identification System as well. But it goes beyond that, obviously, in relation to the horse industry, the bird industry, and other parts of the National Livestock System. What's topical at the moment in relation to livestock is the sheep and goat EID, and I hope Catherine and I aren't stepping on each other's toes too much in this space, so I'll go over this reasonably quickly. But there was a decision made by ministers late last year to implement a national sheep and goat EID. For those of you who aren't familiar with the livestock industry, we have had a cattle and buffalo livestock traceability system in Australia for decades. It hasn't included in every state other than Victoria a sheep and goat traceability system. So we are moving towards implementation of this, and you can see on the screen the time frame to do that. We've convened our own Queensland Traceability Advisory Group to guide that, working with industry, which includes not just producers of goats and sheep, but also the agents, the processors, the sale yards, the equipment manufacturers. There's a whole range of players in this space that will require communication and consultation over the coming months. And we're also building our training and education program to include on-site training for those people that work in the sheep and goat industry that may not have had much experience in this space. Some of you might be wondering why we're talking about goats. The goat industry has exploded in Australia in the last 10 years. It was just primarily and predominantly two parts. There was a rangeland harvesting industry and there was a goat milk industry or dairy industry. And we've seen a huge increase in goat meat as a product, and the size of the goat meat industry has grown substantially. There's still a very large rangeland part of that, which adds a complexity when it comes to traceability systems. Plant traceability is something, Ram, I know you've been particularly involved with through this GS1 project. We are particularly keen to look at what opportunities the GS1 model provide and present. We think there's a whole range of elements and needs that are met by the GS1 system, and we're quite keen to build on that. And as you know, we had a meeting yesterday in relation to how this might work at a national level, and there are still some questions around, I guess, policies associated with it from a government point of view, mandating versus voluntary, data sharing, whether or not there's a governance arrangement that sits over the top of this that's required in relation, the same way that we do for the NIS that's required for the plant industry. So we will work with within the national biosecurity consideration of this system, but I think that the beauty of the GS1 is it gives us the technical system that's in place, enables us to build on that with those other elements, the policy and the governance elements that need to be completed. I'm going to finish with just a little bit of a different one from a traceability point of view, and this is around the use of diagnostics for traceability. So we saw this in COVID, so everyone's familiar with this now in relation to how you can actually use genetic sequencing to trace. And we've done a lot of work in this space since the white spot virus outbreak in southeast Queensland back in 2017. So you'll recall there was a lot of discussion in the media at the time in relation to where this particular virus had come from, how it had gotten into Australia. What we've done is use high throughput sequencing to be able to actually create an association map for the white spot virus that we had in Australia. But in fact, this work that's been done in Queensland is the first time it's been done anywhere globally. So actually doing a mountain of testing of the different sorts of strains of the virus globally. So collecting samples from all over the world, collecting results from all over the world in relation to sequencing, and creating this association map. Interestingly, you can see that Australia sits up there right on its own in relation to where this virus has come from. So from the point of view of traceability, we use this at the moment for the Very Important Fire Ant program. So we can actually sequence an ant that we find, a queen that we might find in a new nest, and we can trace that back to where it's come from in terms of an outbreak, which helps us, for example, with things like compliance work, whether someone's actually moved some soil or some plant material outside the movement zone without authorization, and we can actually use this sequencing, this diagnostic tool to enable us to trace back. The reason I put this up is because in the national biosecurity system, we didn't actually have a framework, a policy framework, standard procedures and guidelines for high throughput sequencing. So one state or another or a university wasn't able to have a reference point in terms of how they might use a diagnostic tool for tracing. So we've led a project at a national level, and Victoria's been very much part of that, to actually put these standards and guidelines in place around using high throughput sequencing that enables us then to have some confidence, some level of authority in relation to the veracity or not of the tests that are being done and how we might use those. We're exploring this for plant-based diseases at the moment as well. So we're doing some research on Fusarium oxysporum at the moment as we speak, to see whether or not it's actually possible to use a piece of the DNA from Fusarium to actually do tracing as well, because that's got obvious application for us in a range of different plant species, but at the moment, particularly in bananas in far north Queensland, where we've got an outbreak of Panama TR4 that we're managing. So I just wanted to give you a few examples, Ram, in terms of the different things that we think of when we think of traceability. It's not just about a single system like an NIS and replicating that for plants, but there are other tools that we've got that we can use as well in the overall tracing of pests and diseases. Thanks very much.
Malcolm, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you kind of touched on very core pertinent topics today that are very much relevant on how traceability can genuinely help the progress of the biosecurity strategy there. I really appreciate. I've taken some notes, and definitely there are a few questions I would like to explore myself, but we'll actually park it for the panel discussion. And based on the time and availability, we may touch a question or two to expand a bit more on what you have shared with us today.